Hello friends, this is Mike from Wright, and this is the explanations video for SAT 2's reading section, passage number 2, question 21. Data in the graph provide most direct support for which idea in the passage? All right, this is a quantitative information question. It's the kind of question that asks you about graphs, but it's a unique one. It's one of the hardest kinds of questions because it's not just asking you to read the graph and, how high was the profits in 2006, but it's asking us to relate the ideas in the graph, the story the graph tells, to claims in the passage. All right, the way you want to do this is first to get a grip on the story that the graph tells. Now, I suggest in the annotations video that you ought to do this before you even get to the questions. And here it's that the importance of it is really sort of redoubled. It's extra important to understand not just like what this is a graph of, but like the point of the graph. What is the story the graph tells? So let's get our grips on that. First, you want to start with the title. This is a graph of profits. It's a graph of regular coffee profits compared to fair trade coffee profits. They've got some profits, other profits, two profits are being compared. All right, that plays out in the axes to the graph. Here our x-axis is years. We've got whatever is happening from the year 2000 to the year 2008. And then our y-axis is the amount. The amount of what? The amount of profits. This is profits in US sense. This is money per pound. Amount of stuff, how much weight of what? Of coffee did you move? The amount of dollars you make per pound. This is the profits axis. Arguably one of the hardest parts of the graph and underscoring the importance of reading the title of the graph. All right, so this is a graph of profits over years where we've got two different lines drawn on it. And here this open circle line is for fair trade coffee. That's this one. This is the fair trade coffee line. These are the profits for fair trade coffee. And then we've got this closed circle line. These are the profits for regular coffee. And this graph is designed to compare these two. Well, let's compare them. Notice anything about these two lines? I do. This line is higher than that line. This line also moves less than that line. This line is pretty consistent, and this line moves up and down. Big thing, though, comparing these two, is that fair trade coffee has higher profits. I think that's a reasonable story to get out of this graph, even before you've seen the questions. But then, if you're looking down at this question and you're asked, the data in the graph provide most direct support for which idea in the passage, you really want to have a sense of like, all right, what is the main story this graph is telling? And here the main story is that fair trade coffee generates higher profits, in Tanzania anyway, which is to say that fair trade coffee makes money. Okay. Now, if we want to answer this question, and what I would say is like the best way, the way that I often come up with is like plan A, which is like find the right answer from the passage, know that it's the right answer, and then find it in the answer choices. The way of doing that is to ask yourself, like, what is the interplay between this graph and the passage? What is the relevance of this graph to the passage? What does this graph have anything to do with the passage? Now, there are sometimes when the graphs are like really not that related. But here, there are some sort of, I guess, like low-hanging fruit, maybe medium-hanging fruit, connections between the graph and the passage. And it has to do with the fact that we're talking about fair trade coffee. This is an example that comes up in the passage. In fact, it's the subject of an entire paragraph in the passage. So if we're looking for a connection between this graph and the passage, probably a good place to start is the whole paragraph where the author is saying a lot of things about fair trade coffee. And as you'll see, this is the sort of the beginning of the road to just like the right answer, finding the right answer without having to go through each of these answer choices, just knowing what the right answer is, as if it were a free response question. So you want to use your notes to rapidly locate where the author talked about fair trade coffee, right? This is where part of the value of our notes is being able to be like, fair trade coffee, where was that? Instead of having to read a bunch of paragraphs and be like, oh, no, that's the Adam Smith paragraph, and then read the next one, oh, that's the Aristotle paragraph, right? You just look in your notes, and here's one. It says, example, fair trade coffee. So we're right here, and this is sort of a timing strategy note. You want to be able to find it quickly, and this is, having notes on this stuff is how you can find it quickly. And then we want to ask, like, what does the author say about fair trade coffee? What's the context in which this graph is going to come up? And here our notes can be helpful as well. Fair trade coffee comes up as an example of how the three viewpoints, and to review the viewpoints, these are viewpoints on how to look at ethics and economics. The first viewpoint was Adam Smith's viewpoint. He thinks that ethics is about empathy, but that empathy is sometimes counterproductive, and so really self-interested behavior is often what leads to the best outcomes, and selfish behavior is therefore justified by outcomes. Adam Smith, empathy, outcomes, viewpoint one. Viewpoint two is Aristotle, talking about character, how ethics is about character, having the right characteristics, being virtuous. And viewpoint number three was ethics is about actions. Ethics is a list of do's and don'ts. And here the author is saying that these three viewpoints can coexist. Clashes aren't inevitable. And he gives the example of fair trade coffee to sort of demonstrate this. Fair trade coffee, coffee that is sold with a certification that indicates the farmers and workers who produced it were paid a fair wage. Take this, for example. Buying it might have good consequences. This is Adam Smith is happy. It might be virtuous, so that's Aristotle also happy. And it might also be the right way to act in a flawed market. Here the example of fair trade coffee is to sort of demonstrate that the three ways that he's introduced us of looking at ethics don't always have to clash. In fact, there are things in the real world that make all of them happy, where all three accounts say, yeah, great, that is ethical. Common ground like this, the author continues, suggests that even without agreement on where ethics applies, here Aristotle and Smith, they don't agree with each other on where ethics applies, ethical economics is still possible. So here you could have told that from our notes, and here I'm just like summarizing the substance from you, but you can see it in the notes. These three can coexist. There's an example of fair trade coffee. All three viewpoints are happy, and then the author comes in with this claim, economics can be ethical. Now, this claim right here is the main point of that paragraph, and which is one of the sort of first early clues that this answer choice C down here is the actual answer. The whole point of this whole paragraph is to say that common ground like this makes ethical economics possible. Another alternative way of thinking about the main point of this paragraph is to say these three things can coexist. They don't always have to fight each other. And then let's think about now what extra information the graph gives related to these ideas. Here, he gave fair trade coffee as an example of something that's just like great. Everybody thinks it's great. Adam Smith thinks it's great because it has good outcomes. Aristotle thinks it's great because it's like a virtuous thing to do. Oh, you're buying fair trade coffee, you care about those workers, you know. And the actions people might think it's a good thing to do because the act of buying more ethical coffee is a better act than buying regular coffee with unfair working conditions, etc. Now, the information that the graph adds, if you recall, is that fair trade coffee also makes higher profits, right? Even though they have to pay their workers more, which that's what a drag. We almost might be. I can't help myself, you know. We might be wasting money on unproductive capital by paying our workers fair wages, even though fair trade coffee has to do that. They have to pay their workers fair wages, and that costs money. Even though they do that, it still makes higher profits than regular coffee. It's more profitable. It gives us more money. That, I think, is the root of the claim, that in addition to being virtuous like Aristotle and having good consequences like Adam Smith and being the right action, it also happens to be the most profitable thing. I mean, this, in the context of this passage, fair trade coffee is just the goddamn best. It's a miracle worker. Makes us hella money, gives us all the virtue, everybody's happy. Adam Smith clinking glasses with the actions people, you know. It's just the best from all sides. Now, that's like the general vibe of why answer choice C is right. Answer choice C also happens to be right word for word, but we're going to get there last. First, we're going to go through the specific sources of wrongness in each of the other answer choices. And most of them are rooted in the fact that this example is about the relationship between the three viewpoints. This example, or what the graph is adding, or the point of the graph is to support the author's claim about all three viewpoints, that these three viewpoints can all coexist together. The wrong answer choices are often going to be because they aren't about all the viewpoints existing together, they're just describing one or another viewpoint. So let's get to it. Answer choice A. Data in the graph provide most direct support for the claim that acting on empathy can be counterproductive. Now, you might recognize this claim from the paragraph about Adam Smith. Where did he see it? Oh, yeah, acting on empathy could be counterproductive. That's line 18 right here. But one of his key insights, Adam Smith, was that acting on this empathy could be counterproductive. Right? He observed people becoming better off when they put their own empathy aside and interacted in a self-interested way. Now, this is inside Adam Smith's viewpoint, and this is the part where Adam Smith realized that sometimes going out of your way to be nice to other people doesn't actually lead to the best outcomes. All right. Wrong for a couple reasons, and the first, as I mentioned, is that this is only about viewpoint number 1. This isn't commentary on all 3 viewpoints, and as we mentioned, the graph is about fair trade coffee, and what the author is using the example of fair trade coffee for is to make this point about all 3 viewpoints. Fair trade coffee is an example not just of good consequences, but also of virtue and acting in the right way. Okay. In addition to that, let's think about just the content, of the claim that we're talking about here. Acting on empathy can be counterproductive, right? This claim is that, this is the part of Adam Smith's point where he said that, our note is empathy is dumb, right? You're trying to go out of your way to help somebody, but it ends up being counterproductive. It ends up biting you in the ass. It would have been better if you had just looked out for yourself the whole time. Well, that's not what's going on in the graph. The graph is an example of how being empathetic is dope as hell. You're being empathetic, you're doing fair trade stuff. Adam Smith, Aristotle's happy because you're being virtuous and kind and giving, and it's not counterproductive at all. In fact, it's a better way to make profits than being totally self-interested and doing the regular coffee stuff and not paying your workers and being a horrible boss. All right, so answer choice A is wrong both structurally and on the merits of the specific claim. Let's look now at answer choice B. Data in the graph provide the most direct support for the claim that ethical economics is defined by character. All right, now, this is wrong in a pretty parallel way to answer choice A, where it's the kind of thing that you might remember from the passage. Aristotle is the dude who defines ethics based on character. But again, the fair trade coffee example isn't part of the author saying, oh, I agree with Aristotle. In fact, I think ethical economics is defined by character. It's not defined by the other stuff. Character is the one that wins. Aristotle's the one that wins. Character is the way to go. Instead, the point is that regardless of how we define ethics, there are places where all 3 viewpoints play along. So it might be that, so maybe you saw fair trade coffee and be virtuous as oh yeah, fair trade coffee, character. But the point of the point of the fair trade coffee example, and by extension the point of the graph and the role that the graph plays in this example, isn't Aristotle wins this debate, but rather it's common ground like this suggests that even if we don't agree, even without agreement on where ethics applies, ethical economics is still possible. Here the author is saying it doesn't matter which viewpoint you take. With some things, ethical economics is still possible. So again, answer choice B is wrong because the author is making a point right here with fair trade coffee about all 3 viewpoints, and it's only about viewpoint 2. I think that's the most technical reason why it's wrong, but it's just broadly speaking, in these reading passages, if there's a claim about everything, wrong answer choices will really commonly only give you one thing or give you the wrong thing. So if you come across answer choices like this and you recognize the trap, that's one of the most quick and accurate ways of getting the right answer choices on these questions, is being able to identify oh yeah, for sure, that's one of the most common tricks they play. It's definitely going on in this question. All right, skipping over the rightness of C until we get to D, data in the graph provide most direct support for the claim that people fear losses more than they hope for gains. All right, now this happens in line 75, and this happens at the end of the paragraph where the author is making this point, this sort of new point, that he thinks and that John Stuart Mill thinks and most people think, everybody thinks, that real people are irrational. Right? The clearest place he says this is is actually in the next paragraph. These human quirks mean we can never make purely rational decisions. Boom. That's the purest place where he says this. But that's the point of all of this rambling. And this claim right here, the claim that we're talking about, in answer choice D, we behave like a herd, we fear losses more than we hope for gains, rarely can our brains process all the relevant facts. These are points about how real people aren't capable of being the purely rational, selfish beings that economists assume that we are. Now, that might be why it's appealing. Again, it's a claim that happens. Just as, these ethics being counterproductive, ethics being defined by character, these are things that occur in the passage. It's just that the graph isn't designed to support these claims. Here, these claims are humans act in a weird, unpredictable way. We can't understand stuff, we're irrational in all these different ways. The graph kind of is neither here nor there with respect to that claim. Another way of putting it just in terms of the passage is that by the time we've made this claim, we've sort of moved on from the example of fair trade coffee. We talked about fair trade coffee and said fair trade coffee is an example of how all three viewpoints can be happy. And then the author makes this separate point about ethical economics is possible, but also we're thinking about humans in kind of the wrong way. We've been assuming that they're rational, but they're really not. And this is why I think psychology is so interesting, and psychology might be the way forward. So this claim occurs in the context of the author kind of transitioning away, or it's like post-transition. The author has already transitioned away from fair trade coffee as an example, and is now in the process of making a new point. So it's not that it doesn't appear in the passage, it's just that the data in the graph have nothing to do with whether people are rational or irrational. It has more to do with, and I've said this a million times now, but it has more to do with the point that the author is making when he's talking about fair trade coffee, which is that ethical economics is possible, economics can be ethical, and that all three viewpoints can be happy. And that's where the rightness of answer choice C comes from. And it's literally just word for word. Ethical economics is still possible from line 66. Ethical economics is still possible in answer choice C. And again, I think the fastest, best way of getting to that answer choice is having high quality notes. Knowing that the graph is about fair trade coffee, looking for the paragraph that's about fair trade coffee, being able to find it rapidly, being able to ask yourself, why were we talking about fair trade coffee in the first place? Answering that we were talking about fair trade coffee because we were giving an example of how all three viewpoints can be happy, and then seeing that the point of all of that was to say that ethical economics is still possible. All right. That's it for this question. That's it for the passage. So I'll see you all in the next passage or whatever other problems you're going to be looking at.